Good morning. Welcome once again to all of you. Welcome to Boston College, to this summit on the future, really, of urban and rural Catholic schools. Certainly am delighted that you are with us and that we will have the chance to listen to people who have given a lot of thought and energy to this crucial ministry of the Church. And to listen to each other and to benefit from each other's experience. And so during our 2 days, as we listen, as we deliberate, as we share our expertise, as we share our challenges, and in the midst of it all, as we pray that the Holy Spirit will be with us, not only during our time here, but certainly that God will continue to bless the work of our hands. We have a schedule for the program. We will be here this morning for both Archbishop Gregory's address to us and then for the panel on data related to our schools. We will then move right next door to the Heights Room where we will have lunch and where Bishop McManus, who's currently the chair of the Committee on Education of the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops, will address us. At that point, we will be moving to our middle campus. Some of you might want to take the stairs, but there are elevators between this lower campus and middle. For those of you who might be a little chronologically challenged, a little bit on the older side or not, but certainly we will give you directions to get up to the middle campus, and we will be spending the afternoon in Fulton Hall there. Remaining on the middle campus for our liturgy for the Feast of the Sacred Heart at St. Mary's Chapel, which is in the Jesuit community, and then back down here to the Heights Room to end our day with a celebratory banquet. Without further ado then, again, on behalf of Boston College and our President, Father Bill Leahy, will have the opportunity to make welcoming remarks himself this evening at our dinner, but certainly on behalf of the entire university community, welcome. We have a staff, Terry Alden, and a graduate student and an undergraduate student who will be here to take care of your every need. So please do not hesitate to contact them or to contact me if there's any way that we can be helpful. So welcome to Boston College. Welcome to this seminar. Delighted that you are here. And now Karen Risto, the president of the National Catholic Educational Association, our partners for over a decade in this work of Conversations and Excellence in the SPICE Initiative, will offer her words of welcome to our conference. Karen.
Thank you, Joe. I'd like to add my welcome to Joe's and tell him delighted that we are here for, I think, our 10th, 11th year of being at Boston College and having a partnership with Boston College to do this program, special programs for the improvement of Catholic education. Although this is the first time I have ever attended SPICE, I have been very much in touch with SPICE since its beginning because a number of us had the idea how good it would be to get people together who are doing best practices and to share that. So SPICE turns out to kind of be a good little name for what we're doing because what we're going to do today, from talking and listening and solving our problem, we're going to add spice. Maybe it will be the salt of the earth to the earth that we are. But in that sharing and listening that you do, that then will go out to many, many other places who will learn from you in your sharing. So I am very glad you are here. And I hope that this is a good occasion for you to learn, to share, and to have a little fun. So welcome. I would like to introduce next Sister Glenn Ann McPhee, who is from the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops, who is a partner with us for the first time.
Thank you, Karen and Joe. It is a delight to be here. And the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops is really excited to partner with NCEA and Boston College in this year's SPICE program. One of the reasons that this came about is this document, renewing our commitment to Catholic elementary and secondary schools in the third millennium. And as you leave the auditorium this morning, there are copies of this, and feel free to take a couple of them because I don't want to take them home. But we really encourage you to be in touch. This is a pivotal document that was passed by an overwhelming number of the bishops in June of 2005. It's a document that is really a roadmap for securing the future of our Catholic elementary and secondary schools. And we want all of you to be very familiar with it. Archbishop Gregory and Bishop McManus are going to allude to it today. I think it is a document that really can help you in your local schoolwork and in your diocesan schoolwork in terms of securing a future. All of us share a real concern about our rural and urban schools. This has great ideas, great direction for improving the strength of those very schools. So they're on the table, and I encourage you to take them. And again, the conference is just delighted to be a partner in this year's SPICE program. Enjoy your days.
This morning, I have the pleasure of introducing Archbishop Wilton Gregory to you. Bishop is the Archbishop of Atlanta. He has been there since 2005. He was in Belleville, Illinois as a bishop before that, and I know he is originally a Chicagoan, and I know there are some other Chicagoans here. Many of you are familiar with Archbishop because through all the difficult and the hard work he directed with a very steady hand and with pastoral sensibility when he was president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops from 2001 to 2004. But most of all, Archbishop Gregory is a friend to us. Many of you know he welcomed the NCEA convention to Atlanta and with great hospitality, when we knew that it was not possible to go to New Orleans. His leadership with the staff there made extraordinary things happen for our convention, and we are most grateful. I also want you to know what I know, that when Archbishop Gregory leaves here today, he is returning to Washington, D.C., where tomorrow he will receive the Cardinal Bernardin Award from Catholic Common Ground, which you know that is an organization which promotes dialogue in our church. And it's an association which helps people with differing opinions and interpretations come to common ground. So in a time, or as Archbishop reminded us at the convention in his homily, we, the church, are always in a time, but when speaking and listening thoughtfully to one another is not only necessary, but reminds us of the healing mission of Jesus. So we are delighted to have this good leader, this person who brings people together. He's here with us this morning to help us think through our concerns. Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you very, very much, Karen. I am deeply honored to have been invited to offer this keynote address to this, the 11th annual SPICE conference at Boston College, which is focused on the 2005 statement of the Catholic Bishops of the United States, renewing our commitment to Catholic elementary and secondary schools in the third millennium. The specific theme for these 2 days, Endangered Species, Urban and Rural Catholic Schools, presents all of us with some specific and real challenges. I want to take one moment to recognize Dr. Karen Ristow, President of the National Catholic Educational Association, Sister Glenn Ann McPhee, Secretary for Education of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Father Joseph O'Keefe, Dean of the Lynch School of Education, and the staff members of these three organizations for putting together this important response to the challenges set out by the bishops in our 2005 statement on elementary and secondary schools. This is a positive initial step, and it is very good that these three groups are working together on this project, which I understand is a first for the SPICE conferences. I also want to say that it is no small accomplishment that you have put together such a major conference just a year after the adoption of this major statement on Catholic schools. I congratulate the coordinating committee for its efforts, and I pray that the results of these days will produce some positive recommendations, as well as some best practices that others may replicate in the future. Finally, I believe that there are many areas where the talents of people like yourselves can significantly and positively impact the future of our Catholic schools around the country. We need to pool these talents and to work to take advantage of the many constructive possibilities that tomorrow holds for us. We ought to bring the collective wisdom and experience of the Catholic community into this ongoing process so that our Catholic schools can not only be maintained, but also grow and prosper. Selected programs for improving Catholic education, SPICE, began in 1996 and has been aimed at providing assistance to Catholic school administrators and staffs so that they could emulate the successful programs that were seen as both creative and effective in building partnerships and providing resources to address the pressing needs of Catholic school students, their families, and their educators. Many of the programs offered over the past decade involved issues that are raised in the bishop's statement. For example, mission and identity, the diverse needs of children, finances, the impact of technology on learning, the church's social teaching, and the education of the poor. While I was not a member of the USCCB's Committee on Education, and thus did not have a direct hand in development of the statement, it was an agenda item before the USCCB's Administrative Committee and the full body of bishops during my tenure as president of the conference. I was a participant in the consultation process with the body of bishops during 2004 and 2005. I was greatly interested in the drafts and did carefully observe how those drafts evolved into their final form in Chicago, based on the comments and suggestions of the bishops. I would like to take you back into my past and also into my present life as I try to respond to the task given me for this keynote address. First, I grew up in Chicago, one of our great American urban centers. Catholic elementary and secondary schools at the time were a vital part of parish life in Chicago. Those schools provided numerous opportunities for the parents and grandparents of the students to escape from poverty, to be prepared to enter the workforce, and hopefully to enter college and the professions. To many, the parish elementary school was a social anchor and a beacon of hope. I attended one of those schools as a non-Catholic and as an African American. Because of that experience, I became a Catholic as a young boy many years ago. Using that education and experience, I then became a priest and finally a bishop. My life is a testimony, albeit not a perfect one, to the contributions of our Catholic schools to the lives of many. I want those schools to be available, accessible, and affordable to as many children as possible, both today and tomorrow, whether they are Catholic or not. Now, let me make a brief comparison of the Archdiocese of Chicago, the Diocese of Belleville, and the Archdiocese of Atlanta, all places where I have ministered to God's people as a bishop. The Archdiocese of Chicago covers just over 1,400 square miles in just 2 counties: Cook, including the city of Chicago and its south suburban neighborhoods, and Lake County, a more suburban community immediately north of the city. Today, there are over 6 million people in those counties, and over 2.3 million of them are Catholics. There are 217 Catholic elementary and 40 high schools enrolling over 101,000 students. 102 of those schools have students receiving Title I services, and 224 schools have students receiving federally financed food services. Between 2004 and 2005, and the 2005 and 2006 school years, 18 elementary and 1 high school were closed or consolidated. Student enrollment declined by over 4,800 in the same period. The Diocese of Belleville covers over 11,600 square miles in the southernmost quarter of the state of Illinois. This is a mostly rural area and is the only diocese in Illinois that is still home mission territory. There are some 850,000 inhabitants in the diocese, and approximately 110,000 are Catholics. Belleville has 33 Catholic elementary schools and 3 high schools, enrolling just under 7,000 students. 23 schools have students receiving Title I services, and 32 schools have students receiving federal food services. 1 Catholic elementary school closed after the 2004-2005 school year. Obviously, The Title I and food service program numbers signal that both Chicago and Belleville serve a significant number of poor and educationally disadvantaged children. The Archdiocese of Atlanta covers almost 25,000 square miles, including the 68 counties in North Georgia. This area contains a major urban center, the city of Atlanta, a ring of mostly suburban counties around the city, and a large number of rural counties. The population is over 6.5 million, and over 600,000 are Catholics. There are 17 Catholic elementary schools and 5 high schools, and 2 unit schools with an enrollment of just under 9,200 students. Most of the schools are located in the greater Atlanta metropolitan area. 1 school has students receiving Title I services, and 2 have students receiving federal food services. The Archdiocese opened 1 elementary and 1 high school for the 2005-2006 school year, adding over 1,000 students to the total enrollment. My predecessor in Atlanta, Archbishop John Francis Donahue, had a vision and a plan to open schools to respond to the needs of a growing Catholic population in an area where for decades Catholics were a very small minority, and in some areas almost non-existent. To emphasize this impression, it is reported that a former member of the Carter administration who grew up in rural Georgia once said that he never met a Catholic until he went away to college. In Chicago, over a period of years, the number of Catholic schools and students enrolled in those schools has been declining. It is a story that is replicated in numerous urban centers, especially in the area stretching from what we generally know as the Middle Atlantic states, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, to those states around the Great Lakes, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Minnesota. The Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, CARA, conducted a study which you will hear more about later on today, which shows that 80% of the closures and consolidations of Catholic schools between 2000 and 2005 were in these 2 regions. The report goes on to say that in many of these areas, we have facilities and few people to use them, because people moved and the schools did not. As Catholics grew in numbers and in economic status, they moved out of the cities and into the suburbs. Recently, as the economy suffered a downturn, funds were not available to maintain all these facilities. The old adage that you build a school, then a church, was simply no longer operative. In 2005, in a response to the current situation, the Archdiocese of Chicago issued a detailed plan for the future of its Catholic schools. Genesis, a new beginning for Catholic schools. It echoes the bishop's statement in calling for the total Catholic community to be involved in advancing the future of Catholic schools in new and vibrant ways. it also stresses Catholic identity, academic excellence, stewardship, fiscal management, new and vital governance models, marketing, and leadership. While the plan recognizes that some existing schools may close or be consolidated, it clearly calls for new vital forms of Catholic elementary schools across the Archdiocese at strategically located sites, as well as a consortium of select schools operating in the city of Chicago. The plan calls for strategic marketing and communication strategies designed to support Catholic schools and enhance the perception of these schools as strong, viable, accessible, and affordable. Finally, it calls for a process to generate professional development programs designed to increase the leadership skills and competencies of principals so as to strengthen the school's vitality. This is just one model, and I am sure that there are other dioceses with similar documents. These should be made available so that dioceses that do not have the resources of Chicago or others can adopt planning programs to their own particular set of circumstances. This might be helpful to rural areas like Belleville. Rural dioceses may have a different set of challenges, including larger distances between towns, parishes, and schools, smaller numbers of Catholics, a lower level of economic growth and prosperity, and the lack of any significant kind of governmental assistance. These all provide challenges for the future maintenance and growth of Catholic schools in rural America. As the statement says, one of the more important aspects of successful Catholic schools is the presence of administrators and teachers who should be, and I quote, grounded in a faith-based culture, have strong bonds to Christ and the Church, and be witnesses to the faith in both their words and their actions. The formation of personnel will allow the gospel message and the living presence of Jesus to permeate the entire life of the school community and thus be faithful to the school's evangelizing mission. This is especially difficult when many of our rural dioceses have no Catholic colleges or universities readily available to assist in this task. Dioceses, colleges, and universities need to look for innovative and effective ways for administrators and teachers to access such training programs. Both the bishop's statement and the CARA report point to a number of reasons for the decline in enrollments, including demographic changes, shifting populations, and new immigrant groups. Finances, rising property taxes, higher building costs, rising salaries and benefits, and the changing economic situation in the country. The CARA report also points to one more issue that we cannot afford to ignore, which is what we refer to as a weakening of an attachment to parish life. This is especially evidenced in a significant decline in Sunday Mass attendance, most clearly found among our post-Vatican II families. While the Catholic population of the United States has doubled since 1955, weekly Mass attendance has declined from 74% to 45% of Catholic families. This clearly and negatively impacts the number of children receiving religious education in both schools and parish programs. We need to study and research this phenomenon and work to strengthen our evangelizing and catechizing of our Catholic people. With this issue as background, let me share a short story. After filing his will, Patrick Henry said, "I have now disposed of all my property to my family. There is one thing more I wish I could give them, and that is the Christian religion. If they had that, and I had not given them 1 shilling, they would have been rich. And if they had not that, and I had given them all the world, they would be poor." We all know that parents want to see their children have more of the things that they did not have. It is critical that we mobilize our efforts and devise ways in which we can convince and assist our parents to pass on our most important treasure to our children, and that is our Catholic faith. In a column in the May 8, 2006 issue of America, Terry Galway sums up something we ought to consider. The column is entitled "A Brighter View." I was far too gloomy about the bigger picture of Catholic schools. He goes on to say that while dioceses and religious communities are struggling to keep schools open, and often such struggles end in failure, a relentless focus on numbers does little justice to the work of Catholic schools, to the work Catholic schools are performing in spectacularly diverse settings. Furthermore, he says, the fact that those schools are in many areas that Catholics have largely abandoned is a tribute to the Church's commitment to the poor, regardless of where or how or if they worship. We cannot forget that. We cannot forget those who labor in this ministry with salaries and benefits that they could easily double if they went elsewhere. We cannot forget the important involvement of so many parents in our schools. We cannot forget the sense of community that is found in these schools. Galway goes on to say that we need to work so that our schools can compete with both good public schools and more expensive private schools. We need to seek out ways to persuade suburban parents with creative marketing to pay tuition on top of high property taxes, because our schools are academically sound and provide moral guidance for life. I agree with Mr. Galway. Sometimes we do sound too gloomy about the future of our Catholic schools. I think the bishop's statement takes the right approach. While looking back at the models and successes of the past and the present, the statement clearly points out some future challenges, but they are not overly gloomy and despairing. These challenges ought to be viewed as a series of great possibilities for growth and for improvement. With each challenge, the statement recommends steps that the Catholic community should take to help make our schools available and accessible to as many parents as possible, as well as academically sound, truly Catholic, and financially stable. The section on future actions proposes specific steps for the larger Catholic community to address those recommendations. The bishops then reiterate our conviction that Catholic elementary and secondary schools play a critical role in the Church's duty to model the person of Jesus Christ, to teach the gospel, and to evangelize our culture. Thus, it follows that the work of the school is irreplaceable, and the investment of human and material resources in the school becomes a prophetic choice. Considering the financial challenges we face in many of our schools, but especially in our urban and rural areas, it is interesting to note that the only place in the entire printed version of the statement that a section is set apart and highlighted in a different color is the following quote from the synodal document, Ecclesia in America. And I quote, "It is essential that every possible effort be made to ensure that Catholic schools, despite financial difficulties, continue to provide a Catholic education to the poor and marginalized in our society. It will never be possible to free the needy from their poverty unless they are first freed from the impoverishment arising from the lack of adequate education. Providing that educational opportunity to the poor and the marginalized has been part of the glory of our urban and rural schools. We must find ways to continue to provide such a service in the future." The statement ends with a call to the entire Catholic community to support this mission because it is vital to the future of our young people, our nation, and most especially our church. As you continue your deliberations over these days, please know that my prayers will be with you. Don't be too gloomy about the future. Walk forward with faith and courage because you are all part of a great ministry. Our Catholic schools do wonderful things for our young people. I thank you for all you do for our children, our church, and our nation. I especially thank you for the sacrifices you make in this important service. I know that God will bless all your efforts. I was honored by your invitation to be with you for part of this day. I trust that my words will contribute in some small way to the success of your deliberations. As one who was once an inner city kid in a Catholic school, I hope you continue to invite my colleagues who sit in those desks today to believe in Christ and to believe in the future and to believe in themselves. Thank you for your kind attention.
Well, we can be reassured of one thing that we have always said about Catholic schools: we raise good leaders. Thank you. Bishop would take a couple questions and answers, and answer a couple questions, if there are any questions. Are there any questions?
More importantly, if there are any answers.
We can make this up.
Okay.
I can tell those. Oh, Carol.
Yes.
Bishop, how can we engage civic leaders to understand what you have just said, and to buy into the concept of Catholic schools, into supporting Catholic schools? And by civic leaders, I mean, I also mean church leaders of other denominations too, because we do a really good job with their kids.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I can only tell you how I approach that matter. When I first arrived in Atlanta, as well as in Belleville, I made it a point of making contact with the existing business communities and political communities and individuals to establish a personal relationship. And I would emphasize the importance of the personal relationship because people buy into people before they buy into institutions. And so as you develop those relationships, you establish your credibility, and it's your credibility that I think will prompt people to enter into collaborative relationships. So I guess the easy answer is what promotes Catholic schools are the individuals who are committed to Catholic schools and their vision and their values, and then those dialogues are established on that basis. I know in the Archdiocese of Chicago, Cardinal Bernardin began the Big Shoulders project. And I think he didn't do it until he had been there for a while. He had established some credibility. He got to know the business community. And then he listened to them. I think Bishop Terry Stibe has done a similar thing in Memphis. And the people in the business and the political world, once they meet us, hopefully they aren't deterred by meeting us, but hopefully they meet us, they get to know us, and then we get to know them. It seems to me that in both those two relationships, and I know there are others, I only cite those because I know a little bit more about them than others, we also listen to what the business community needs. So it's not just a dialogue that occurs because we have a need, or many needs, they have a need. And in both of those situations, as I recall, and I acknowledge I'm looking from afar, the business community said, we won't have a well-qualified job force if we don't invest in the education of today's young people in such a way that they will be prepared to enter the job market 5, 10, 15 years later. So it was to their advantage that educational opportunities were affordable and available to train the workforce that their companies would need in the next generation. I also think, and this is an even more difficult sell, the success of our Catholic schools should not be viewed as a threat to public schools on many different levels. We know, and it is true in all the dioceses where I served, most of our Catholic kids go to public schools. So I don't want to do anything that would be detrimental to public schools, because the majority of my kids are in public schools. And I think we should make that clear, that what we are doing in our community schools, our parish schools, is not a threat, nor would we ever intentionally harm the programs of public schools. And finally, I really believe that as Americans, given our economic and social and market worldview, competition is always good. Good schools invite other schools to become better. But that's a hard sell. A lot of people are threatened, but anyhow, that's too much of an answer to a rather, I think, honest, straightforward question. Okay? Yes?
There's a pastor in our diocese who says that if he didn't have his Catholic school, he wouldn't have his parish. Mm-hmm. And by those words, he's pointing out the need of the church for Catholic schools. And we've talked about this morning. In the different dioceses where you have worked, Bishop Gregory, are there programs or practices or structures that have been set in place to encourage priests who are pastors of parishes not to lose heart and to take on a Catholic school if they don't have one, or to twin with another parish, or are there some good practices that you can point out from your experience?
Yes, there are, and above all, there have been and there continue to be good priests who really have a heart for Catholic schools. We priests, and this has become all too obvious over the past 5 years, we priests are human beings. And, you know, we have clay feet, and we have dreams and hopes, and go through moments of great enthusiasm and the depths of despair. So I would never say that a pastor who made a statement that was seen or viewed or considered as anti-school was necessarily anti-school. I think that what we need to do, and we're in a transition moment, I think, in the United States, in the church in the United States. We are moving from the model, or have moved from the model, maybe is a better approach, a better way to say it, where schools were seen as parochial entities. It was St. Patrick's School, St. Francis School, Immaculate Heart of Mary School, because they were identified with the parishes and the religious communities that supported them or sponsored them. We're moving, I think, into an arena where there's a mutation, where schools are regional schools, where they are supported by a cluster of parishes or a deanery, or they are diocesan schools that are financially supported by the larger community. I feel very blessed to be the Archbishop of Atlanta, simply because I have discovered the many, many, many thousands of wonderful people. But I feel blessed because we are, as that transition from parochial to regional or diocesan or area schools is going on, that's how most of our schools, many of our schools, have been established. And so the challenge that a lot of communities in those regions that I just mentioned are facing is that the mutation is going on, changing what was a parochial school or 3 or 4 or 6 individual parochial schools into a regional schools. And they bring the baggage of their history. This used to be St. Francis, this used to be St. Anne's, this used to be St. Joseph's, and now it's All Saints. I have a theory, by the way, and it's probably not provable, but I bet the most popular name of a Catholic school now is All Saints. Because as it's been mutated from the 5 original schools, the name that was most inclusive and least offensive is All Saints. But that's a hard sell, because in communities that have a history and a heritage, if they were ethnically diverse and separate at one time, it's hard to get beyond that. Whereas in my archdiocese, the schools that we have, many of them were established as regional schools, so they don't bring that baggage. But there are still problems that some of our pastors face, because we haven't worked out yet how are the individual parishes related to the schools. Because what's common property belongs to no one. So how do you get the pastors and the priests from the neighboring feeder parishes to invest in these regional schools, because I don't really control it. It's not mine. There are other problems that come, so it's not a panacea. One I got within about 2 weeks of my assignment, and a number of parents who come from the maybe 6, 7, 8 parishes that feed into this regional school, they want to celebrate the sacraments as a school community. They want all the little second graders to make their first Holy Communion in a school context rather than a parish context. And my pastors go right off the chart. And so we have to tell, wait a minute. The school provides a certain context, preparation, helps the kids prepare, but the sacramental celebrations really belong in the context of the worshiping community, because those parishes in which the families of these little ones live are providing a huge subsidy to keep this regional school open. And to have the sacrament celebrated in the context of the worshiping community is a source of encouragement. The people who belong to the parish and whose funds are being used to support these schools see the kids as they are prepared for the sacramental life of the church and celebrate those moments, along with those kids from the parish who don't go to the regional schools. So I offer all of those things not so much as solutions, but just to let you know that we're working this out in all of the contexts. As you're creating All Saints schools from the cluster of 8, 9, 10 parishes, even those that are generated outside of an earlier history have challenges. But we're Catholic people. We're worthy of the challenge. We can get through. We can do this if we keep talking to each other. Thank you.
Let's thank Bishop again. Thank you. Thanks, Bishop. I think we have time for a little coffee and then off to our next session. Thank you for your attention.
Move to our next session. Before that, however, a couple of announcements. To introduce our staff, and you've met them, Terry Alden, who is in our staff programs for Catholic school outreach, and will be the administrative assistant for our new Center for Catholic Education that we're launching this August, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later. Michael Norman secondary ed major, and so will be a teacher, which is great. We have lots of them around here, very encouraging. And then Amelia, who is just starting her master's degree in secondary English and came from Trinity University in San Antonio, where she just finished her bachelor's degree. They are available to help you with whatever you need. So please feel free. They're terrific people, and they're well-informed and patient and generous. One note about cars. If you have a car and staying overnight on campus, that is not a problem at all, but you need to let one of our staff know so that your name and the information about the car will go to the campus police. So we don't want anyone to go overnight. So please contact them. Second, brief announcement. There were a series of books and brochures on the table. At the moment, if you could take one for each school, and then if we have some left over, they could be distributed. But we'd like to make sure that people from that they get spread around enough. So thank you again, and let's move on to our next session. Sister Dale McConnell.
Good morning. Welcome to the session on research in Catholic urban and rural schools. I'm Sister Dale McDonald. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Education Research at NCEA. And among my duties is the preparation of the annual statistical report on schools, staffing, and enrollment that many of you are familiar with. Also on the panel this morning is Dr. Mary Gauthier, who is the Senior Research Associate at CARA, the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Mary is a sociologist by trade, and she focuses on national level and diocesan demographic data. EA commissioned last year, Primary Trends and Outlook, which Mary will discuss. And then Father Joseph O'Keefe, who is the Dean of the Lynch School of Education here at Boston College. Father O'Keefe's work has focused largely on Catholic education, and particularly inner city Catholic education. He's written several articles and books on the topic and is a lecturer on the topic as well. So the three of us will be the panel this morning looking at the numbers. And generally, what we'll do is I will show you what some of the numbers are currently from our database at NCEA. Mary will, referring to the CARA study, which looked at schools for the past 5 years, tell us how we got to where some of these numbers are today. And then Father O'Keefe will focus a little more narrowly, specifically on inner city schools, and offer some suggestions about what we might do about it. So that's generally the focus for this morning. This first indicator is the actual enrollment numbers this year. Elementary schools, secondary schools, and total. And you notice, as far as Bishop Gregory pointed out, and I guess this is not working the way I wanted it to, that most of the, almost half of, a little more than half of the schools are located in two areas, the Mideast and the Great Lakes. And that will surface again in the next report. But this is what's an interesting picture to look at, the actual picture of where we've been toward the last end of the last half of the last century and where we are now. That at the height of Catholic school enrollment and schooling, we had almost 13,000 schools in 1960. And we see the decline coming down to 2006, where we're now at a little over 7,500 schools. So nationally, we lost about 41% of our schools in that time period. And the elementary school decline was about 39%, and the secondary school was about 50%. Staggering numbers, and some of what's here may also have some embedded data. When you look at the sheer numbers, it looks as if we had lost about 555 schools in the last 6 years. However, those totals, which are aggregates we get from the diocese, also include the schools that opened. So that in reality, we probably lost close to 800 schools, but the number gets fixed because we have, upped a bit because we have the inclusion of the newer schools that have opened. What's also going to be a very telling number next year will be what happens in the Gulf Coast region. We have currently 89 of the schools have opened in Louisiana, but there's another 35 that may never open again. In addition, in some of the areas in Mississippi and Texas, we have schools in alternate facilities that are now trying to reassess whether or not they will be able to go back to their schools and be able to continue, so that the numbers may be more seriously impacted. This year, if they could, schools stayed open even though they combined with other schools or were in alternate facilities and trailers and roller rinks and several other, creative places where they opened the schools. But the other thing I think that's important to look at is that perhaps the actual number of schools is not, and the decline in that is not as dire as it might portend to be if, in fact, we did retain the students from those schools that were closed. And I'll say a bit more about that when we get to the enrollment. The location of the schools 10 years ago, we had 23% of the schools in the rural areas, 34% in the urban, 12% in the inner city, and 31% in the suburban. When we look at the picture today, we see the big decline in the rural schools. We've closed almost 300 schools in that 10-year period rurally. Urban, we closed about 378, and the inner city schools about 150. And sometimes that number blurs between urban and inner city. While we define in our data collection urban as large central cities, and we try to be more specific about inner city with high concentrations of poverty, at times people blend the two. And so generally when I report, I try to show the two together, which gives us some more accurate picture. The types of schools by governance. In 1996, we had the parish schools as 71%, the inter-parish as 10%, almost 11, the diocesan almost 8, and the private schools almost 10. We see a shift in this period of time where the parish schools have significantly declined, more than 1,000 of them. And some of them happen to also be the rural schools. We can't differentiate, but when we look at some of the patterns from the dioceses, we're looking at the single elementary schools in rural areas that have no places to combine with to be a consolidated regional school. The inter-parish schools we see have grown almost 4%. That Bishop Gregory referred to, and also the diocesan schools have also grown, where dioceses either had parishes merged schools or the diocese itself took over the schools. So we're looking at parish elementary, inner city rural as our most seriously affected, and that will be most of Mary's talk. Just an interesting highlight, because we get these questions all the time. What's the percentage of religious to lay? In 1960, we were still almost 90, we were 90% religious. Today, we're less than 5% religious and 95% lay colleagues. Looking at the enrollment picture, today we have the 2.3 million, which I referred to earlier. And again, just to back up to that, the most of the enrollment is also concentrated in the Mideast and the Great Lakes. That's where most of the schools are, where most of the schools were built because of the high concentrations of population, and the students are there as well. The picture of the Catholic school is not as diverse as the population in general, but over the years we have included more Hispanic, Black, Asian, and so on. But the white, it's still more than 2/3 a white population. We have a growing number of people, though, and you notice the multiracial, where we give people the opportunity to indicate if they are more than one race, and we are serving quite a number of those students. The population that's non-Catholic is 13.5, I guess in statistics you could make that 14%. Not reported. That 9,000 number for not reported also includes, does not include the figures from New Orleans. This year we had trouble trying to put these reports together because we could not get very specific data other than the number of schools opened and the number of students in New Orleans. In addition to these figures on the what the student profile looks like, the Title I school population, schools that have Title I services are almost half. There would be a little more than half if I had actual counts for New Orleans. And the lunch program too, almost half of our schools participate in the federal nutrition programs. So we are serving, despite all of these notions about these elitist Catholic schools, we are serving children of modest and low income means. The enrollment trends for the 10 years is what's problematic for us as we look at the numbers that in this 10-year period, there has been a little more than 10% decline in the number of students. Again, we see the high concentrations in the Mideast and the Great Lakes, but also in recent years in the Northeast. They've seen that with some school closings, particularly here in the Boston Archdiocese, that as jobs move out and population shifts, we are losing some of those students. And then you see the happy note there with the plus 2.6% for the Sun Belt growth. And some of that, the West, Far West, even though it's a 1.5% loss, some of that is in the large Los Angeles, has areas where they have closed schools, lost students, but the number is picked up by some of the areas in Arizona and Texas where there is some growth, and they're all in that one region. But what's problematic and what Mary will address, the 12 largest dioceses, which are our urban centers, and that's New York, Chicago, Boston, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and so on. The loss there is 21% over the last 5-year period of time. 5 years, lost 21%. There is an accelerated loss of students and schools during the past 5 years. Nationally, that number is at 14%. But if we take out, looking from the 12 largest dioceses, if we extract that out, the national total would be, in the other schools, non-inner city, would be about 11%. Still a precipitous decline in a short period of time. But the good news is that we are opening some schools. We see that particularly in the Sun Belt region, the bars at the far end of the chart. When we see the schools in the Mideast and Great Lakes that have opened over the period of time, some of those are suburban schools, suburban areas within those large urban dioceses, where parents had been content with the good public school academic education and now are starting to question the need for religious values in the education of their children and have been opening schools. Those are in the wealthiest suburban areas. The schools that are opening in our inner cities are primarily those specialized schools that deal with at-risk students, the Cristo Reyes, the San Miguel schools, and nativity schools that are focusing on a small population, serving a small number of students with a very concentrated focus. But nonetheless, I think what the data will show us, and Mary will talk more to it, there is a demand for Catholic education. And we have the problem, as Bishop Gregory talked about, we have schools where there are no people, and we have people, or very few people, and we have people where there are very few schools. And that's something that we need to address as we go forward. So I will turn this over now to Mary. Mary, which is yours, 2006?
No.
Background?
Spice.
This one is.
The last one.
Mouse challenged.
Come on, Mouse. There you go.
Thank you, Dale. And thank you for inviting me to be with you here at this National Summit. I'm going to be reading my remarks to you so that I stay on track and so that I stay within the allotted time frame. The study itself was very comprehensive, very large, multifaceted, and I could go on and on and on, but I don't think you want me to. The data I share with you today come from a series of surveys and trend analyses of Catholic elementary education in the United States that was conducted by CARA. The study was sponsored by a grant from the National Catholic Educational Association, and the research focuses on identifying and providing an empirical understanding of enrollment trends in Catholic elementary schools during the 2000 to 2005 period. I'm going to focus my remarks today largely on the trend analysis that points out the primary long-term trends influencing enrollments in Catholic elementary schools, as well as some shorter-term tipping point events that caused these trends to accelerate during this time period. And then I will also highlight a few of the principal differences that distinguish urban, suburban, and rural schools, and how these differences affect school enrollments. The components of this study that CARA conducted was, first of all, a trend analysis of NCAA's databases, the ones that Dale was referring to, of Catholic elementary schools, official Catholic directory data at the diocesan level, and other CARA databases. We also conducted a survey of 176 diocesan superintendents. We surveyed 1,250 Catholic school principals and 750 pastors at parishes with Catholic schools. And then finally, we surveyed over 1,400 Catholic parents of school-aged children. The key findings from the trend analysis were that there are two long-term trends affecting Catholic schools' enrollments that were exacerbated by two other tipping point events that caused an acceleration effect and a consequent drop in enrollments. The two long-term trends involved Catholic migration, first out of the Rust Belt states and into the Sun Belt states, and also from inner city neighborhoods into the surrounding suburbs. And at the same time, younger generations of Catholics have weakened attachments to parish life as measured by Mass attendance, and is referred to by Archbishop Gregory in his talks. Those were the long-term trends, and I'm going to describe those in more detail in a minute, but I want to point out also the two principal tipping point events that happened during the 2000 to 2005 time period. The first was the U.S. Catholic clergy sexual abuse scandal, which was a media event of unprecedented dimension, beginning early in 2002, when the number of public accusations spiked dramatically. The effects of these reports of abuse are twofold. First, some dioceses have had to plan for and deal with large settlement claims or judgments, or the potential for such financial impacts in the future. Preparations have often included reorganizations of some sort and/or an adjustment to budgets. Many reorganizations have included parish and school closings. On a second level, close to 4 in 10 Catholic parents with elementary school-age children who have not enrolled them in a Catholic school said that the allegations impacted their decision not to enroll their children, at least to some extent. Those least affected by the allegations are parents with children already enrolled in a Catholic school. Very few of them indicated anything more than a little concern about the allegations. That was the first tipping point, and then there's a second tipping point that's related to a broader set of financial issues. CARA documented a 10 percentage point decline in the percentage of Catholics who say that they have given to diocesan appeals since early 2002. The polls indicate that many of those who report a decrease in giving have been more affected by personal economic factors than by the sexual abuse crisis. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, the U.S. was in an economic recession that began in 2001 and lasted through 2003. In addition, school leaders note the challenges of increasing costs associated with providing health care and other benefits, energy costs, and costs associated with the maintenance of aging facilities. In fact, costs for benefits have risen at rates well above inflation in recent years. As a result of these and other factors, a number of dioceses have intensified their reorganization plans and have closed parishes and schools that may have been subsidized and supported under different circumstances. So next, let me show you the effect of some of these long-term demographic trends. The long-term trend of Catholic migration out of the Rust Belt states and into the Sun Belt states, and from inner city neighborhoods into the surrounding suburbs that has been occurring for the past several decades has resulted in many Catholic schools that are located in areas of substantially declining population. For example, as Bishop Gregory noted, 80% of the schools that were closed were in the Mideast or the Great Lakes region. And in fact, 55% of all the Catholic elementary schools that are currently in operation are still in those two areas, the Mideast and the Great Lakes. Another example of this migration is, take the county of Wayne County, Michigan. That's where Detroit is located. Wayne County lost more than 300,000 Catholics since 1950. But counties on either side of Wayne County, neighboring Oakland County, gained 250,000 Catholics since 1950. And Macomb County gained 180,000 Catholics. Unfortunately, they didn't bring their schools with them. So 1 in 5 Catholic elementary schools are now located in counties that have had a loss in Catholic population, or very low growth since the 1950s. Those are the counties that are shown here in orange, or tan, or yellow. And if you can see the little black dots there, each of those black dots represents a Catholic elementary school. 23% of the schools are in moderate growth counties, which are shown in light green, and 54% are in high growth counties, which are shown in dark green. The counterweight to school closings during the 2000 to 2005 period is the continued need for waiting lists in many schools, especially those in the South and in the West. You see all the dark green counties in those areas, as well as in New England. Rather than any national decline in demand for Catholic elementary schooling, the net loss of schools occurred in part because too few new campuses were established in areas that have waiting lists. At the same time, this is the other long-term trend, younger generations of Catholics have weakened attachments to parish life as measured by Mass attendance. In 1955, 74% of self-identified Catholics said that they had attended Mass at least once in the last 7 days, when asked by Gallup researchers. In 2004, however, only 45% of self-identified Catholics responded similarly. So even though the Catholic population is nearly doubled between 1955 and 2004, the estimated number of Mass-attending Catholics per parish is nearly identical at about 1,500. Parents who attend Mass at least once a month are more likely than those who attend less regularly than that to enroll a child in a Catholic elementary school. 39% of monthly Mass-attending Catholics enroll a child in Catholic schools, compared to 13% of those who attend less than monthly. Another part of that trend is potential Catholic first grade enrollments, as measured by baptismal cohorts. This number is also very consistent to that of the 1950s. So you can see by the graph the bulge that took place, the baby boomers who were in elementary schools in the late 50s, 60s. The estimated pool of Catholics ready to begin elementary school in 2004 is very similar to that of 1954. However, the current and emerging geographic centers for these potential students in the 21st century no longer overlaps as well with the Catholic elementary school system that was primarily designed and built in the early 20th century. According to our survey of parents, 23% of those who had children of elementary school age during 2000 to 2005 have enrolled at least one child in a Catholic elementary school. Another 4% attempted to enroll at least one child but could not, most often because either they could not afford the tuition, 76% gave that reason, and or the school had a waiting list. Another 31% gave that reason. These are the primary long-term trends that are affecting Catholic elementary school enrollments and whose effects have been exacerbated by the tipping point effects of both the clergy sexual abuse scandal and the recent financial issues of recent years. Now I want to focus on some of the other important differences between urban, suburban, and rural schools that we found in our research and how those differences impact decisions about Catholic school enrollments. We found that urban schools make up close to half of Catholic elementary schools now. Suburban schools make up about a third, and rural schools make up about a fifth. On average, rural schools and urban schools are older than suburban schools. They have older buildings. Tuition is highest at urban schools and lowest at rural schools. Schools established before 1975 with no new construction have lower tuitions than newer campuses. Schools with more students charge more for tuition. Schools with the least diverse student populations have the lowest tuitions. Enrollments, not surprisingly, are highest at suburban schools, lowest at rural schools, and the pupil-to-teacher ratio is lowest in rural schools. This shows the share of school income, how it's proportionally divided by school location. And what you see there is that urban schools have a greater share of their income from diocesan subsidy. That's the 6% that's in gold at the top of the first bar. Rural schools, by contrast, the last bar, have the largest share of their income from parish subsidies. Both of these sources of income are threatened by current conditions. Urban schools are more likely than suburban or rural schools to say that the number of students needing financial assistance has increased in the last 5 years. According to the survey of school leaders, the schools that cannot rely heavily on tuition and instead must rely on parish and or diocesan subsidies to make their budgets are among the most likely to have been notified of a possible reduction in these subsidies in the future. These are the schools most at risk of closing in the near future. Now, the availability of financial assistance for tuition is widespread. That's the parts of the bar that is shown in maroon here. Widespread, but mostly privately funded. 15% of schools say there is a publicly funded voucher, tax credit, or scholarship program available for parents. And 70% say there's a privately funded voucher, tax credit, or scholarship program. Urban schools are more likely than suburban or rural to have a privately funded voucher or scholarship program. During the last 5 years, the average tuition for the first child enrolled in Catholic elementary schools has increased sharply, 28%, in fact, in nominal dollars, and 17.8% in real dollars if you adjust for inflation, from $2,276 per year to $2,681. In this figure, we demonstrate the relationship between the household income level of Catholic parents and, first, their likelihood of enrolling a child in a Catholic elementary school, that's the dark green bars, and second, the importance that they place on affordable tuition, that's the light green bars. As you can see by looking at the last set of bars, 45% of Catholic parents earning $125,000 or more in household income have enrolled a child, at least one child, in a Catholic elementary school. And as one might expect among parents in this income group, only 25% indicate that an affordable tuition was very important to their decision about whether or not to enroll. The relationship is mirrored in the other income groups, and you can see, for example, that in those parents with a household income of less than $25,000, only 11% say they have enrolled a child in a Catholic elementary school. And among those that have enrolled, 2/3, 67%, say that affordable tuition was very important in their decision about whether to enroll. School leaders, in fact, are most likely to cite tuition costs and insufficient tuition assistance as reasons that parents are dissuaded from sending children to their school. You can see from the graph that tuition and tuition assistance are of greatest concern in inner-city urban schools and only slightly less in non-inner-city suburban and rural schools. Only about a quarter of parents who have enrolled or plan to enroll a child in Catholic elementary school cite insufficient tuition assistance as being at least somewhat of a problem in making their decision about Catholic school enrollment. Whereas nearly half of those who have not enrolled a child and do not plan to enroll a child say that this tuition assistance was at least somewhat of a problem. Again, the reports of this study point to the relative importance of income, tuition levels, and the availability of assistance. The most central economic difference between those Catholic parents who choose to enroll a child and those who do not are not necessarily income or the tuition level, but rather the availability of financial assistance from some other source, whether it is the school, parish, or diocese, or some other type of scholarship program or a public or private voucher program. And finally, a word about waiting lists. About 3 in 10 Catholic elementary schools had waiting lists during the 2004-2005 school year, nearly unchanged from 5 years ago. However, the number of children on those waiting lists has declined from an average of 26 in 2000-2001 to 17 in 2004-2005. Newer schools, suburban schools, and those in New England, in the South, East, and in the West and Far West are more likely to have waiting lists and more likely to have comparatively larger numbers of students on those waiting lists. Schools with waiting lists often charge higher tuitions. They have moderately diverse student populations and fewer low-income students. Nearly 4 in 10 schools built after 1975 have a waiting list. Those are the schools in the suburbs, while only 22% of older campuses do. Newer schools also have a higher average number of students on their waiting list. And as shown in the figure, suburban and urban non-inner city schools are more likely than rural and urban inner city schools to have a waiting list and have larger numbers of students on these lists. In summary, overall, Catholic elementary schools remain healthy, some even to the point of having to turn away students, at least temporarily. However, few, if any, of these campuses operate without needs, and some are dangerously close to closing their doors. Urban, inner city, and rural schools are among the most threatened by current conditions. The 6-year period studied here in part represents a realignment of Catholic elementary schooling to meet changes in the Catholic population that have been occurring for more than 5 decades. In this respect, the future of Catholic elementary schooling remains as strong as it has ever been. As the results of this study indicate, this strength can be further solidified by ensuring the availability of tuition assistance programs for parents, continuing to emphasize the quality religious education provided by Catholic schools, and by building new campuses in emerging Catholic population centers. Thank you.
I want to, in my presentation, I'm going to focus more closely on inner city Catholic elementary schools. Now, as we've heard, certainly the great legacy of so many of these schools, which historically provided a real possibility of upward mobility. The Catholic population, certainly over the last 200 years in the U.S., and especially with the large influx of immigrants. So certainly the service to European immigrants, moving from poverty to the middle class and beyond, but also moving out geographically of the inner cities and the shifts that Mary were talking about, and that trend certainly continuing. I don't want to belabor the point. So those schools are very successful, but as Dale said, and these are Dale's data, just to look at them graphically, during the 21st century, the kinds of really dramatic threats that these schools are under and the significant number of closures. I want to talk about a study conducted here at Boston College, which really focuses on inner city Catholic elementary schools, looks specifically at that sector of Catholic education. The findings are available in a book published by the NCEA, which I strongly encourage you to purchase. And I want to talk a little bit about that, and I think it presents a profile of these inner city elementary schools and some possibilities of what seems to work, especially when we looked who are the schools that are really bucking the trends, that are surviving despite the environment that has been described to us? The methodology we used, again, this is survey data. One of the difficulties that we had certainly is trying to focus on inner city, and we have some definitional problems there. What is urban, what is inner city, et cetera. So what we tried to do is look at other indicators like poverty indicators and ethnicity indicators and geography to come up with a composite. So we looked at 384 inner city schools across the country, and you can see, at least if you look at the percentages of schools by ethnicity, by race. So for example, 76 of the schools, 19.8%, had over 75% black enrollment. So you can see that they would fit the inner city categorization. Compared to the nation's general pool of Catholic elementary schools in our sample, larger concentrations in the Mid-East, West, and Far West, more schools sponsored by archdiocesan or diocese than parochial, significantly more non-Catholic students, 25.6%, 4 times as many black professional staff, twice as many Hispanic staff, and twice as many staff who were members of a religious community, which is both financial and mission related, that I'll talk about a bit. 73% of the students aggregate in these schools were members of what would be considered minority groups. So now, we looked at a set of issues that we thought would be helpful to try to understand what is going on within these schools. And you can see the list of various kinds of issues that we looked at, but in a thumbnail way, I guess I like alliteration, but we looked at sustainability through students, staffing, and structure. And the analysis was to look at descriptive analyses to serve as a general reference text and some of the differences that lead to better decision-making mechanisms as we see it. Let's look at students, so the first S. Remember, we're looking at students, staffing, and structure. I talked a little bit about the ethnicity of students, where the church certainly is providing opportunities to people of color, which is, when we look at demographic trends in the U.S., of course, increasing. We looked at issues related to the population of students in regard to foreign-born students, and especially in the schools that are heavily Latino, and the issue of limited English proficiency and the growing numbers there, which of course has big implications for curriculum and instruction. Some of the family characteristics that we looked at, and again, you can just kind of look over them. I'm not going into great detail, but I think one of the important aspects that we found when we looked at students in the study, very often what one hears in the rather acrimonious debates around government funding is the fact that Catholic schools are populated only by elite students, be it socioeconomic elite, be it educational attainment of parents. And what we found, in fact, that really is not the case. If we look at issues like family structure or socioeconomic status, the number of students free or reduced lunch, living at or below the poverty threshold, who have been homeless at some point, and certainly without health care coverage and those issues. By religion, what we found within our schools obviously is the more diverse religious background of students. And remember, of course, this is the self-described, what principals would describe as the religious background of their students. What we found in general is who are the non-Catholics within Catholic schools. And one of the frustrations that I found is very often the categorizations are Catholic and non-Catholics, as though those who have religious interests and those who do not. And that's really a very false way to look at the reality, because most of the non-Catholics in the schools that we looked at are African American Protestants. And so I think the whole question related to schools that are Christ-centered, teach the gospel, evangelize, the vast majority of students are Christian, certainly. I also think we need to consider in this debate about focusing our resources solely on Catholic children as opposed to non-Catholic children, some of the issues about mass attendance and how Catholic are the Catholic kids. So in this issue of our religious mission, I think we need to go beyond self-described religious labels. Educational aspirations we found very high, which is, I think, at least my psychologist colleagues would tell me that is a very important indicator of long-term educational success. Enrollment and retention, what we found in these schools, now this was before some of the issues, the data were collected 2000-2001 academic year, if you will, before the perfect storm, if you will, of economic trends and of trends related to church scandals, et cetera. But certainly there was some capacity. Final thoughts, I think, why should a diocese or religious community devote scarce resources to provide educational opportunities to non-Catholics or marginal Catholics? And it really depends on one's theological perspective. And one of the things that we tried to do in the book is when we look at a lot of these empirical data, and as NCEA does and as CARA does, what does it mean for us as people of faith? What are the theological issues that get raised when we look at the empirical reality? Staffing issues, and as you know, of course, staffing is so key, given the fact that you don't have good teachers, you don't have good schools. Staff are overwhelmingly white, and that is an issue certainly that schools face across the nation if the racial and ethnic mismatch between the students who are in schools and the adults who work there, and the importance of things like role models from the culture of a number of the children. And certainly it's no surprise that we have to redouble and more our efforts to diversify those who work within our schools. The professional staff, 80% full-time. One of the things that we found is, in terms of teacher certification, that 58% were certified, which is quite a difference from the public schools, certainly, more so in the primarily white schools. And of course, when we looked at issues related to student demographics, white and higher level of income go together. I mean, race and poverty are correlated. They are nationally, and they are in this sample too. One of the interesting things, of course, in terms of teacher retention is the white schools where more certified teachers and higher income had a more difficult time retaining teachers. Well, because arguably they had other options to go right into public education. But certainly, I think the overall picture in terms of staffing is a revolving door of younger people. And so when we look at issues related to inner-city Catholic elementary schools, the staffing issues have to be at the top of the list. For those who leave, and this is what principals told us, 20% leave the profession completely. Not surprising, certainly the data. I was Tuesday attending a day-long conference looking at Boston Public Schools, which are going through a time of transition with a new superintendent. And there in the Boston Public Schools, they lose 50% of their new teachers after 3 years. So it's a problem that we have, but it's a problem that, that urban schools have generally. It's important to note that while, by and large, Catholic elementary schools, unlike a number of more affluent schools and public schools, rely on principal, teachers, period. And what we find, certainly in so many schools, that the need for professionals with various areas of expertise that can look at the whole child. And so within these schools, there were nurses, psychologists, speech therapists. You can see the long list of people, but certainly in very tiny numbers, very often on a volunteer basis. And when we think of things like the problems that we just heard about with Mary on tuition dependence, staff who can engage in effective development programs, who can engage in negotiations with government to get grants for kids, et cetera, is key. So we need to think broadly about the staffing. Again, many of them volunteers, but volunteers come and go, and very often you really can't, in some ways, relying on professional volunteer staff, while very important, is to some extent building your house on sand and not on rock for long-term sustained impact of other professionals. We looked at principals, and one finding that I just want to raise in regard to the principals is how many of them were women religious in their 50s and their 60s, highly educated, highly experienced, who worked for stipends. Who's going to replace them? And so that was an interesting issue, and especially, and I suppose Mary could tell us something about the demographics of women religious, but certainly you put that together with who is in these inner city schools, and it's quite stunning. And here you just can see this graph, principals and teachers by status within the church. Primarily, of course, the teachers, like teachers in schools generally, like in Catholic schools, are 78% lay women, but if you look at 40% of the principals of these schools were religious sisters. And that's one of the points that I certainly wanted to make in terms of the staffing issues. Let me look at structure for a minute, and certainly one of the issues in school reform that we look at, the need for accountability, the importance of providing evidence of successful schooling, the need to restructure to meet the diverse educational needs of children and families, possibilities and looking at pedagogical innovation in many ways. What we found is that these schools are remarkably traditional, and there are some good parts to that, but there are some parts that aren't very good too. We need to also pay attention to looking not only at teaching and learning, but the barriers to teaching and learning, and deal with those non-academic issues that are so potent in providing in barriers for children to really succeed. And the other thing too, I think we need to think about when we look at location of schools, again, where the population is and where the schools are, and we look at our Catholic population as it shifts. But I suggest we also have to think about the importance of having schools as anchors to neighborhoods and communities. Obviously, schools exist for the students who are within them, but very often what we found when we did a geographical analysis of where these schools are, they're very often in neighborhoods where not only has the Catholic population left, but intact institutions have gone too. The importance of being a presence in those areas. The schools, same kind of findings about the age of the schools, and certainly even when we look at struggles to get through operating budget year to year, there are enormous capital costs that are looming. Now, many urban public school districts, the same story, but they have, with government funding, much better capability to respond to that. We did report an increase in non-tuition income in a number of these schools, and that was a very important thing. We asked some trend data of the principals, and clearly for the future of these inner-city elementary schools, it is really, I mean, along with creative leadership, along with meeting non-academic needs, along with demonstrating educational effectiveness through assessment measures that aren't punitive but that are constructive, we also have to say non-tuition income is crucial, and stable non-tuition income. Instructional practices, certainly we've seen the growth of early childhood education, the importance of that in providing. That's really where the bigger numbers are, and we're seeing that anecdotally in a number of places, and our data showed the same thing. Extended programs also, that what we know is for effective schools, it's no longer simply the traditional school day. It doesn't meet the needs of families, it doesn't meet the needs of kids, and don't we know so much more about academic effectiveness depending upon summers, preschool, after-school programs, etc. Some of the curricular practices, we were interested in looking at issues like, for example, English language learners, bilingual education, immersion, the importance of community service learning, and when we get to issues related to the ethos of these Catholic schools, the contribution that they make to the common good, elementary schools engaging in service learning. Partnership with other institutions. Given the fact that many of these schools can't afford the array of professionals to meet with the diverse needs of children and their families, what we found interesting is the number of schools that have formed partnership with institutions. Now, certainly we know when we look at something like Catholic healthcare, Catholic social services, Catholic education coming a bit late to the table, but my Lord, we need to work together. If you're in a parochial school in the inner city and you're really worried about the fact that kids don't have decent health care, that the parents don't have insurance. If there's a Catholic healthcare network, shouldn't we work together? So when you have scarcity of resources, what we want to do is collaborate. And sadly, so many of these schools and so many of our ministries within the church, just like universities themselves, trust me, people live in silos and don't benefit from one another. So certainly looking at these partnerships, and that's an area that we would certainly want to follow more. Of course, technology is a major issue in schools. It is a major capital cost. And the importance of technology in a number of the programs, and one of the probes that we certainly would be interested in, because we know anecdotally so much of the technological hardware that these schools have gotten through various kinds of government loans, government grants, have become very fancy, expensive dust collectors. Technology is useless unless you have people who are trained to use technology, to integrate it into learning, to tie it to the assessment of student outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. A lot to do there. Governance structure, changing governance structure, the importance of boards. Again, I can't go into great detail on all of these, but I think when we look at changes, as Archbishop Gregory talked about, the merged schools, new governance models, and we'll be hearing a lot about that in these days. Some final thoughts, I think, for structure, and I've often said this to folks, the great strength of Catholic schools in the U.S. is their autonomy. The great weakness of Catholic schools in the U.S. is their autonomy. The ability to innovate on a level, and that was really why we started SPICE. People need to learn from one another. But certainly I think in these times of threat and difficulty, there is a psychological tendency, unfortunately, to simply retrench and do what we've always done. And one of the things that we found in the schools that buck all the odds, the schools that are servicing all the kind of kids we want to service, is they innovate. They reach out to the local community. They form partnerships. They have innovative staffing structures. It's not same old, because same old means perish. And so I think the message for us is innovate or perish with these schools that are crucial, and we're going to learn a lot from each other about that. Conclusions. The needs, again, I think certainly the legacy of Catholic education, when we look at people like St. Catherine Drexel, there is so much in our tradition. I was talking to the Archbishop as I was driving him back to the Jesuit residence for him to head to the airport. So often I think we look at the current day, and when we look historically, we look back at the heydays of the 60s and the 70s. Now, that might have to do with the age of many of us who are sitting here, but I think really we need to take hope and encouragement if we look back at the founders of many of these institutions. So many Catholic education initiatives failed in the early years. The threats were enormous. There was no guarantee of success. When I think back to Father McElroy, who started Boston College, he was tarred and feathered by the know-nothings. Never could have imagined what we would see as the success of this modern university today. So we have to take heart that we should recapture that pioneering spirit of those who started many of these schools. Certainly in the involvement of everyone, it has to be the entire Catholic community, we've heard that. And I want to end with a quotation, and I think it should really be a theme for our time together. As we look at these empirical data and we ask ourselves, what does it mean to us as people of faith and as Roman Catholics? As you know, Gravissimum Educationis was the decree on education of the Second Vatican Council. And the fathers of the council said this to the church then, and they say the same thing to the church now. We entreat pastors and all the faithful to spare no sacrifice in helping Catholic schools fulfill their function, especially for those who are, number 1, poor in the goods of this world, number 2, deprived of the assistance and affection of a family, number 3, strangers to the gift of faith. Sure, Catholic schools are for the practicing families who are stable, who give to the church, who go to Mass every Sunday. But that's not enough. Whatever we consider, whatever our priorities, we always have to look for the kids who don't come from the kinds of families where they're likely to be raised in faith, to have great opportunities economically, stability of life. We need to really ensure that we follow the dictates and the advice of the Fathers of the Vatican Council. As I was saying in an interview yesterday, when I look at the future of inner-city Catholic schools, I am not optimistic, but I am hopeful. So let's that set a tone for us in our deliberations these days.
There's some parishes in Philadelphia who have taken their facilities and allowed them to be used by charter schools. And some of them with the understanding that at least there'll be a decent school for their children to go to for the first 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And maybe they would be going to a Catholic school afterwards because its parish itself or the community cannot afford a Catholic education, so this is often an option for education. But having talked with people who've been involved in the charter school process, my understanding of it, if a pastor, anybody who wants to sponsor a charter school can hire whoever he wants as long as they're qualified to be teachers in that charter school. Do you know of any situation in which Catholic communities come together, form a charter school, had Catholics teach the charter school, then outside of the context of the religious day, before or after religious day, has put in religious programs that might have been outside the building? We've been discussing them on some pastors in Philadelphia, and they were wondering about that model. It would certainly have financial benefits, and you may be able to maintain a certain type of.
Well, the key problem with that is that charter schools are public schools and are supported by public dollars. Many of the chartering documents in the states make specific reference to the fact that a religious school cannot be reopened as a charter school, as a religious school. So there are a lot of problems with that constitutionally. I think some proposals have been made about trying to establish a charter school like the situation you're talking about, where they're in the former Catholic school and they hire the Catholic teachers, and then try to do religion after school or before school. But those have not, as far as I'm aware, been able to get off the ground. I'm not sure if anyone here knows something different, but generally speaking, the greatest deterrent is that they are public schools, and the religious component is not compatible with that, according to the state. The question of charter schools is problematic. I was looking here quickly, and maybe Mary can help me out. When we asked people in the CARA study about where you plan to send your children, was it 19% did say they were going to send their children to a charter school? And there's also, I don't have the whole study with me, but there's also another figure where there's a surprising number, or more than I would like to see, of parents who really don't see much difference. Charter schools are similar to Catholic schools, which tells us something about what we need to do to distinguish our schools as religious schools with a specific mission that would differentiate them from charter schools. And one of our, problems in a sense is, and we talk about this at NCEA, if we are really committed to the notion that parents are the primary educators of their children and have the right to choose, they do have a right to choose a charter school and to not choose us. I think rather than focusing on that, what we need to concentrate on is why would our schools be more appealing to a parent than a charter school, apart from the money, and make the case for that. The other research we don't have, and it didn't surface in the CARA report, is the parents who are switching to the charter schools. We don't know much about them, and we don't really have any data. Schools don't collect data on that. But are those children non-Catholics in our schools who now see another similar type of structure that is no tuition based? We need some study on who are these kids who go to charter schools and why do they go, and we just don't have that data.
Let me just raise another issue, and it's anecdotal, and I don't have national data, but certainly I know in a number of cases the decision to close the Catholic school and to open a charter school is driven by the pastor's need for income for the parish. And very often, of course, opening the charter school can then sink the neighboring parochial school. So I think the urgency, and I'm not bashing pastors. I mean, there are urgent needs for parishes that simply aren't self-supporting, and so that's a competing. That's another aspect of the same issue that's driven by the finances, church finance questions.
Kitty?
Yeah, what do we know about Catholic homeschooling programs and their impact on Catholic schools? Anything?
Very little. The National Center for Ed Statistics about a year and a half ago did release a study on homeschooling, and they had some difficulty getting those numbers. We tried several years ago to get a handle on that, and were quite greatly rebuffed by the homeschool people. They have their own leagues, their own networks, and they don't want people interfering with them. So, but there's a growing number. There's over 1 million children being homeschooled. Some of them definitely are from our schools, for a variety of reasons, which are ideological, which are religious-based, which are financial, perhaps. And some of it, even parents' concern about where these children would go to school, neighborhood-wise, and so on. So we have anecdotal information, but no real hard data to substantiate any of those reasons. One in the back.
I'd like to suggest that perhaps a factor that affects children going from Catholic schools to a charter school, aside from the financial factor, might be that weak association with the faith. And so
I'd like to make a comment related to that. We asked in our survey of parents, Catholic parents, we asked those parents who have enrolled a child in a Catholic school or who plan to enroll a child in a Catholic school. We asked them about this decision to enroll their child in a Catholic school and asked them about the importance of several factors in that decision. The number one factor that came out most important for Catholic parents who decided to enroll or intend to enroll a child in Catholic schools, 81% said quality religious education was very important in their decision. That was the number one factor. Now, when we compared that to the important factors that school leaders themselves, principals and pastors said they perceived as important to the parents who were enrolling children in their schools, they rated that factor much lower. They rated much higher things like safe environment, quality academic instruction, discipline and order, sense of community, affordable tuition, and then below those, quality religious education. But among parents, that was the most important factor.
What we don't know from that study, though, is what is their understanding of the quality of the religious education or why they want it. Since the study also reveals that Mary pointed to, those who are parents of school-age children are the least likely to attend church on a regular basis. So what is the motivation for having their children in Catholic schools? You know, is it to compensate for what they don't do at home or some other perception of the religious training? We don't know that factor, but it is an interesting factor. It also has implications when we look at some of the trend, it's not a trend, but some of the concern about maybe we can make this thing work if we go into stewardship programs in parishes and tithing and so on. But if they're not there in church, how are you going to get them to participate in tithing programs and stewardship? So it's a complicated mix of factors. They want the religious dimension, but what it actually means to them, we're not sure about.
I wondered if you broke down the statistics according to regions of the country, you know, for that point that you were making about the rationale that it's for the purpose of high-quality Catholic values or Catholic faith was the reason. I just wondered that coming from a part of the country that is the most unchurched, Northwest. That's why I wanted to see how that was broken down. I really appreciate what you were saying about the younger Catholics who are not going to church, but then send their children to Catholic schools, but the concern that pastors have that they can't get them.
It's a regional breakdown.
Mary's more familiar with all the subsets. I really know the summary report, the big report, but Mary knows how they collected some of that data, those data. I'm not sure of that.
Yeah, I don't see a specific regional breakdown for that number, but it'd be very interesting to do.
We could do it as
I think
a
this is ongoing work, too,
Yes.
that we
Right.
take various cuts of data.
Well, and you saw that in the Northwest, there were some of those dark green counties that indicate very high growth in Catholic population over the past 50 years. So they're moving into uncharted territory, much as they are in the South.
But few black dots.
Right.
All of them filled. It's our elementary schools that have some breakdown, even though we have some new elementary schools and starting with new high schools.
That's why we concentrated the study on elementary schools, that while the school closings have been at a greater rate in the secondary level, the retention of students has been not only good, but increased over a period of time. The last 2 years, we saw less than a 1% decrease in Catholic high school enrollment, but they've been steady. It's the elementary schools that have been in a precipitous decline, enrollments. Jane?
Mary, the parents that you surveyed, you said Catholic parents. Were they parents with children in Catholic schools?
Both. They were,
Was the breakdown of, I mean, at least my experience and in our market studies, when you survey parents that have their children in Catholic schools, they rank the quality of religious education as a priority. When you market Catholic schools and you ask people what they're looking for quality academic programs, safe and secure environment, and then religious values. So I think there's a difference between that. I don't know what the breakdown was within parents with children in Catholic schools and in children outside of Catholic schools.
what we did was we surveyed self-identified Catholic adults with children of school age or preschool age, and then divided that group into those who either have children in Catholic elementary school or plan to enroll children in Catholic elementary school versus those who don't.
80-some%
Are those who,
skewed because
right, that is of that group who either have a child in Catholic school or plan to enroll.
I think, again, this is another research study, but the parents outside of Catholic schools is really the ones we need to understand, or the parents who have left Catholic education.
Right.
I think probably we have time for one more question, then Brother Robert Bamonte will be leading us in a little bit of a broader discussion. And of course, it's the beginning of 2 days together, so the conversation will continue.
Woman here has had her hand up a good part of the mornings. I was pointing to you at the great top.
I was just wondering if any of your data was asked of non-Catholic parents who have children in Catholic schools, because that's a huge issue in the inner city in Wayne County, for example. I don't know how that plays out in the other urban areas.
Yeah, very interesting, but for financial reasons, it was not possible to ask that.
Maybe that woman here, we could do one more.
Okay.
That was a quick answer.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll be around the rest of the day and be willing to, engage in conversation with you one-on-one. Thank you.